Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching The Kevin Moore Show, and on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Robert Snow. Now, Robert has had an interest in the paranormal for many years. His appetite for the unexplained and mysteries were gained from his late grandfather, Dr. Richard Clay, a medical practitioner who was born in Wiltshire. Now, Dr. Clay has several paranormal experiences himself and recorded them on paper as soon as possible after the incidences. Now, he also recorded experiences of his patients that were related to him. Now, Robert is the owner of Dr. Clay's archives, having inherited them when his grandfather died in the late 1970s. Now, he's always adding to them himself, and until recently, Robert was the General Secretary of the Ghost Club, the oldest paranormal research organization in the world. Robert Snow, welcome to the show.
That's right, it's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on, Robert. Well, before we get into the book Strange Experiences, let's just talk about your grandfather, Dr. Richard Clay.
Yes, my grandfather was a medical practitioner in the village of Fovant, about 7 miles west of Salisbury in Wiltshire. And he lived in a very ancient manor house there. The house was apparently haunted, although I myself never experienced anything. My sister and I used to go and stay there a lot. So it was really like a second home. Um, my, when my grandfather, what actually got me interested in the paranormal was through my grandfather. Being a medical practitioner, he was a very methodical and scientifically minded person. And whenever he had any experiences, he used to record them as soon as he possibly could while they were fresh in his mind. And he also recorded experiences related to him by some of his patients. And that's really how I became interested. Probably his most famous case, which is mentioned in a lot of books, is a prehistoric horseman on the Cranborne chase in Dorset. I think it was about, if I remember correctly, 1927 when he saw it. The details are actually mentioned in my book. And at the end of the book, I've recounted some of my experiences. So really, but most of them are about my grandfather, Dr. Richard Clay. I found the paranormal is a fascinating subject.
Absolutely, it is. So, these events that happened were these were not just in the house, the manor house. These were
No,
local in just Salisbury.
no, all around Wiltshire. When he had quite a large practice. My grandfather died, I think it was 1970 or 71, I forget. And he had although he had a country practice, he had about 4,000 patients on his book. Now, these days, I don't think you'd find any doctor who would do that, but he was very dedicated to his work. He loved his work. His work was his life. And he retired when he was 80 years old. He was also a very keen archaeologist, amateur archaeologist, and he was a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. So he put FSA after his name. He did quite a lot of important archaeological excavations. One was he was in charge of excavating what's known as the Avenue at Stonehenge. I mean, everyone's heard of Stonehenge. But, the Phantom Horseman It's rather an interesting case. Um, I think it was about 1926, 1927 when he saw it. He was driving across the Cranborne Chase on a bright sunny day, and this horseman came out of the trees and started to gallop along the side of the road, keeping pace with his car. And when he got to a certain burial mound, the prehistoric barrows, um, the horseman just disappeared. And as it happened in the early 1800s, a well-known amateur archaeologist called Colt Hall, which I think it was something to do with Hawes, the banking family, who lived at Star Head. Um, Colt Hall excavated this particular barrow, and in it they found the bones of a horseman and his horse. And I think it's rather unusual to find a horse buried with its owner. Several other people have seen that horseman. I believe it was last seen about 35, 40 years ago. Hasn't been seen since. But it's mentioned in quite a lot of books, the horseman. But I've in my book, I've copied my grandfather's archives word for word, verbatim, and even the punctuation and spelling and everything are exactly the same as his.
Okay, so I mean, what was the catalyst then for your grandfather to really get involved with the paranormal? Did he ever explain that?
No, he was a brilliant man, had a brilliant mind, and knew a lot about a lot of subjects. Um, I think because he had experience at home in the manor house. You see, he was the third generation of medical practitioners living in the manor house at Fovant, and he died. I think it was 71 or 72, and he soon after he died. Sorry, soon after he retired, he died. I think it was a case of he was probably bored. Sorry, and he was one. He's a very active man. I think he probably missed his job, missed his practice. But although he died, carried on into up to 80. He always kept up to date with the latest medical news, um, medical techniques, new drugs. He just because he was old didn't mean to say he was rather behind times. Um, he was a man who had terrific knowledge. I mean, he could, if he heard a bird singing, he could tell you what bird it was. Great knowledge of nature. He could identify different trees, wild flowers, and I was very close to my grandfather.
Yes, and of course, he would have been over the moon, I would have thought, or maybe shocked that his writings have actually turned into a book.
Yes, I think he would be pleased. But the book it's only been out about 2 weeks now, I think, and it's for sale on Amazon. The publisher is Flying Disc Press, but it is for sale on Amazon. Um, Although it's only been on for a few days, quite a few copies have already been sold, and there's one particularly good write up on there. I've noticed a review, a very good review. As it happens, I know the person who wrote the review, and he's a very critical person. And if he didn't like it, he would say so in the review. But this review is a brilliant review, so it must cause quite an interest in him.
Well, what are some of the cases in there, the reports that your grandfather did that really stand out to you?
I think the Horseman, actually, the Prehistoric Horseman. Um, there were some. I mean, some of the cases are quite minor. I mean, there's also experiences not only of the paranormal, but telepathy and precognition and extrasensory perception and things like that. There is one case of poltergeist activity. He was sitting in his consulting room at the manor house at Fovant, and he happened to hear a sort of rustling noise. And he looked down at the waste paper basket, and there were lots of bits of paper in the basket, and they were all moving around in a circular motion. Nobody was touching them, and there was no draft, no wind, or anything.
Wow.
There was several telepathic experiences,
Uh,
but
when you say telepathic, in what kind of experiences do you mean when you say telepathic?
well, a sort of thought transference. One example I can think of at the moment, he was out with his wife in the country. I think they were picking blackberries or something like that. Um, when he heard a telephone ringing. There was no mobiles or anything in those days. And he couldn't find out where it's coming from. He asked his wife, my grandmother, and she couldn't hear it. My grandfather could. Now it happened that the housekeeper, or the person who used to do the cleaning and everything at the house, was back at Fovant. And when he got back, the housekeeper told him that a particular person had been kept calling and wanted to get in touch desperately with my grandfather because her husband was taken ill. And the phone call coincided with the exact time that my grandfather heard the phone ringing, even though he wasn't near a telephone. Things like that. Some of the things are quite minor, some of the articles, but I think altogether they add up to quite a lot, an interesting, quite a good cross section of paranormal experiences.
Was there any psychic phenomena in there?
In what respect do you mean?
Well, had he come across psychics in his day and they had predicted something that had come true, or
I don't think so, no. Not that I know of, or not that I can remember.
were there any past life regression cases he came across where people had sort of brought past lives into their...
No, no. And one or two interesting experiences related to him by his patients, which he immediately recorded. And I'm fortunate enough that I've inherited his archives, and I'm continually adding to them myself. I've got several thousand articles on or transcribed on my computer. Also, also his archives consisted of archaeological notes and things like that. I haven't put those. I've only put the paranormal stuff on my computer.
What about the story
Um,
of Goodbye Mum?
oh yes, that is something that happened to me. My mother was in a nursing home suffering from Alzheimer's, which, as you probably know, is a very distressing complaint for the people, for the relatives. Um, I used to go up there once a month to the nursing home to pay the bill because I was her attorney, and well, she was incapable. And I didn't often go and see my mother and the staff at the nursing home understood this because it upset me so. And my mother and I were very close. One particular morning, I just phoned up to see how she was, and they said that she was going downhill, and advised me not to go and see her because it would really upset me, because she had deteriorated a lot. This was about 11 o'clock in the morning, if I remember correctly. At any rate, it's quite a long time ago, and I must admit, I wrote this down immediately after I experienced it. But and I haven't looked at the article for some time, so I can't remember all the details at the moment. But at any rate, to cut a long story short, basically, about half an hour after the phone call or so, I had a terrific feeling that I must go up to my mother. So I drove up to the nursing home, which is at a place called East Noyle, just north of Shaftesbury in Dorset. It's actually over in the Wiltshire, in the county of Wiltshire. It's just over the border. And I went to my mother and sat down by the side of her, and she looked very weak. She looked a lot worse than I'd seen her before. And I held her hand, and then suddenly she gripped my hand with terrific strength, really superhuman strength, and it really hurt. And I looked at her, and she smiled, and she had tears running down her face, and then she just stopped breathing. And I rang the bell for one of the nurses to come up, and she confirmed my mum had passed away. But my mother and I were so close. And I mentioned this to a very good friend of mine, the Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe. I've known him for about 30 years. And I think my mother knew she was going to go to the other side. She was going to pass away. And she wanted me to be with her. You see, Mum and I used to do everything together. We were very, very close. That's the explanation that Lionel gave me, and I think that's true. She waited until I came, and then she knew she could pass away to the other side. Lionel told me he'd come across several similar experiences of other people. But yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't. I can only. I mean, I'm not an atheist. I'm a Christian, but I don't go to church a lot. I try and go take Holy Communion on midnight service, Christmas Eve, and on Easter Sunday. And I'm quite convinced that she wanted me to be there when she was passed away to the other side. But that big smile, for a second, it almost seemed to me as if she looked a lot younger, and that big smile. The way she gripped my hand, it was uncanny. I wouldn't have expected such strength with a person in her condition. It was really quite incredible. There's another thing that interests me very much is poltergeist phenomena. My grandfather only records ever having had that minor incident in the waste paper basket, which I just mentioned to you. But it's a subject. I can't remember who said this, but there was a quote. Somebody said the paranormal is a door for which we have no key, and it's a veil through which we cannot see. I don't know if you know who. Does that sound familiar to you?
And who quoted that?
I don't know. I don't know who quoted it.
Well,
I think it's very.
It sounds very true.
Yes, But the thing is that I found with paranormal, scientists um, seem to dismiss anything that can't be explained through known laws of physics or science. They seem to dismiss it. You know, people like I didn't heard of Chris French, the psychologist.
Well, of
Have
course.
you heard of him?
No, I haven't, but of course they do dismiss it. Yes, absolutely. If it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. Yes, or it's some other, yeah, yeah. Well, it's just not scientific, is it? A lot, but I do obviously feel that we're a soul having a human experience, and that we've come here for certain reasons. That we've chose to come here potentially, and that's all I know. Um, and
Yes.
that stories like this help us to, well, it's just interesting, isn't it, to see hear other people's stories of what paranormal experiences they've had. Um, what what about some of the other experiences that your grandfather covered as well? Is there any others that sort of stand out to you?
Um, Without referring to the book, there's one about his brother who was Vivian, who was killed during the First World War. Um, I think he had a dream that Vivian was in hospital, and I can't remember. To be honest, I can't remember the exact details without referring to the article. But he knew, or he had an experience when his brother was killed. His brother was, I think, shot through the neck, and he did have a dream, and he saw him in hospital. It was on the Somme, which I believe a lot of thousands of people died, didn't they? First World War. When I came out of the army, I had a severe back injury. I broke a couple of bones in my spine, but fortunately, in recent years, I've had surgery, which has helped me. My X-ray looks like a Meccano creation. I I went into the Inland Revenue when I came out of the army in Dorchester, and my boss was very friendly with the Pinney family, who lived in an ancient manor house in West Dorset near Bridport called Better's Manor. In the house is preserved a human skull, and the legend is that if you take it out, you'll die. And I got to know the Pinney family, and I've been there many times for meals. They don't live there now. It's owned by Sir Terence Conran, who's, I think, a wealthy entrepreneur. But Michael Pinney, the owner, told me that people used to come and look round the house because it's a grade one listed building and it could be viewed by appointment. Um, it's very remote, and I can only describe it as having a feeling of sort of timeless tranquility. It's a lovely house. Michael told me people come along and say, "Oh, that's a load of rubbish talking about, take the skull out, you'll die within a year." So he'd hand them the skull in a cardboard box and say, "All right, if you don't believe it, take it outside." But nobody ever would. My theory is that a lot of people who say they don't believe in ghosts are afraid to admit it because people will ridicule them.
What do you think a ghost is?
Um, to be honest, I don't know. I think it's a spirit, possibly, but there a spirit of somebody who's passed away. But I think there is one theory which I think is quite plausible, and that is, have you ever heard of the stone tape theory?
No, what is that?
Well, if you go to a place like, say, the Tower of London, where a lot of very strong emotional things have taken place, like executions and murders and things, that something becomes embedded in the fabric of the building or in the ground in that area, and certain people at certain times under certain conditions see what is almost like a video replay. I mean, that is only a theory. I don't think anyone's actually proved that, but quite a number of scientists do have that opinion. Yes, I mean, from my experience, um, 90, about 90% of alleged paranormal activity can be explained through careful investigation. It's that odd 10% which can't be explained, which interests me. I don't think just because you can't prove something exists or something happens, I don't think you should ever dismiss it. I mean, example, dowsing for water. I can douse for water quite successfully with the forked hazel twigs. I can't explain it. I don't think it's anything paranormal. I mean, there's the fact that it actually works. There's got to be an explanation. I do. Have you ever seen dowsing done?
Only on TV. I've never seen it in person.
Yeah, you know how these sticks,
Yes.
forked twigs, they move, don't they?
Yes.
Move quite violent. If you grip, you cannot actually stop them. You know, you can grip them tightly, but they still move on. You know, quite violently when you're over water. I mean, I know that it works because I've experienced it. I can't explain it. I don't think any scientist can explain it. Um, I mean, there are a lot of things in this world. One time, you've heard of the St. Elmo's fire on top of ships' masts,
Yes.
the ball. At one time, people used to think that was sort of ghostly activities, spirits or something. But now, now it can be explained. It's a sort of, I think, a sort of static electricity or sort of plasma. I think the time, although as regards ghosts, I think there are ghosts. There's so much evidence to suggest that when we pass to the other side, we're not, we don't die. There is life after death, but in a different form. What
Yes.
do you, what do
I,
you think?
well, all I know is that at some age, I became conscious of being aware of my being, aware that I was aware. And I'm aware now of my awareness and the almost the I am of me. And
Yeah.
where does this ability to be aware of myself come from? How am I aware? How am I in my brain? How is that just a product of the human process and not something greater than the mind? I mean, if this is a process of the mind to be awake, to be aware, and to be conscious, well, this is, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But is this awareness of myself and yourself going to continue beyond the human body? Um,
I
I
believe,
I don't
yes.
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. And but I can't remember of it being of me coming from anywhere except for just one day or over a number of time in my younger age, slowly becoming aware of my awareness.
I'm very similar to me, actually. Um, my grandfather once said to me, "Don't be afraid of dying, Robert." He said, "As far as I'm concerned, it could be a very interesting experience." And I believe he's right. He was a very wise man. I was really close to him. I was closer to him than my sister was. I used to go when I stayed with him. I used to go out in the car with him when he went to visit patients. But he was so dedicated to his work. People would ring him in the middle of the night, were worried. He'd always go out to visit them. He had a phone by his bed. But it's a subject which you can never, as far as I'm concerned, the paranormal, never get tired of talking about it or looking into the subject. I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of books on paranormal. That I was fortunate enough that two people who passed away, their widows, gave me their collection of books.
Gosh.
I've got quite a lot of books from Peter Underwood. You've heard of Peter Underwood?
Why does that ring a bell?
Used to write on ghosts.
Okay, you got his collection.
No, some of his books he gave me autographed. And have you heard of Dennis Barnes, who was the founder of the BBC Panorama programme?
No, I've not, no.
He died, I don't know how many years ago now, probably 10, 12 years ago. And he was the founder and first editor of the BBC Panorama programme, which is still going on. And he wrote 4 books on ghosts, and I've got a copy of each one autographed by him. There was a man named Tom Perrott. He died about 2 years ago in his 90s, and his widow gave me his collection of books. I mean, I should never read all the books. I suppose in some ways I'm a bit of a magpie as regards books. If I see a book on a subject that interests me, I go and buy it, and I might never read it.
Right. Yes. Of course. Of course. Now, in your grandfather's collection of short stories, did he ever talk to you about an experience with your unidentified flying objects?
No, I don't recall. He didn't record anything because there's nothing in his archives about it. But let's say UFOs are interesting things. There's another thing that interests me, and I've read quite a bit about it. In the States, have you heard of the Skinwalker Ranch?
I have, yes.
It used to be owned by an American industrialist, multimillionaire called Robert Bigelow, and I believe he sold it. But it's a lot of strange things happen there. And I believe they're quite genuine, because on the internet you'll find quite a number of, I think, reliable people talking about their experiences at Skinwalker Ranch. Have you read anything about it?
There was a movie about it. I saw the movie, but yes, I used to hear about it on Coast to Coast when Art Bell used to do interviews about it.
And there's a man named George Knapp. Do you know of him?
Yes, he's a Coast to Coast host as well.
Yeah, he's given a couple of YouTube videos of him talking about it. I think there is something in, but I believe at Skinwalker Ranch it's quite a variety of things happen: UFOs, strange animals, cattle mutilation, poltergeist activity, apparitions. I think virtually everything seems to have happened at Skinwalker Ranch.
I must. Well, I'm off to the States soon. I should really try to go to see that, shouldn't I? If I could do. It's located in Utah.
Yes, but I believe there's terrific security. There's a lot of security guards around the ranch. Nobody can get near it.
Right. Yeah,
But
there was a film in
I'd like
2013 called Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, there was. Yeah.
a lot of that was fiction, I think, wasn't it?
Uh,
Did you see the film?
yes, I did. Yes, I
I
did.
think probably it's fact, based on partly on fiction, partly on fact. I'm not sure.
I
I think there
would
was.
say so. I would say so. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Um, I think it was a yeah, it was a it was a film, so there was stuff that wasn't so factual in it. Absolutely. Um, okay, well, is there any other stories that you might like to share with us from the book?
Um, just trying to think. There are a lot of small articles about telepathy and precognition, and a lot of those. Some of the articles are only a few lines in the book, but I think the one that stands out, the most famous or most notorious, is the Bronze Age Horseman.
Yeah. What was? How did you choose what to put in the book and what to leave out?
I put everything in everything in the book.
Oh,
His complete paranormal archives,
right. Okay, so everything's in the book. Yeah, everything's in the book.
plus experiences I've had. One is at Woodchester Mansion. Have you heard of Woodchester Mansion? It's in Gloucestershire near Stroud. I went there. I went there one night. I was asked to go with a Fox Television. Were filming. Um, they were doing some filming. There was a program on in the States called, I think it's the world's scariest places or scariest places on earth. And I went there with the film company. They were. The thing is, what they did, they had a lot of covert cameras hidden around these various locations, and they put a family, American family, husband, wife, and children, in there for a few days, and left them there, not telling them that there were these hidden cameras, and everything that happened to them was recorded, and unknown to the people, there were there was some there was a group of people, a team of people who were monitoring what happened, and everything I think was recorded. Um, but I went there. They went there to do a bit of filming before they put the family in this house, and one particular incident that happened um, was there was a we were all down in the Woodchester Mansion. It's a sort of Gothic revival house that was never completed. It was There was a house there before called Spring Park, which this man William Lee purchased it. He demolished the house and built a sort of Gothic style mansion in the on the site. The house was never completed. The legend is that the workmen who were building the house, they actually they were frightened away because of the paranormal activity. But I think the real reason was that William Lee ran out of money, that it was never completed. It's a grade one listed building, and it is open to the public. At any rate, one particular time we were all sitting down in the lounge, which is the only drawing room, which is the only complete room in the house. And I mean, there is electricity there. And we all heard a terrific knocking noise coming from upstairs. So myself and two colleagues went up to investigate where the noise was coming from. It was extremely loud. And we went up to where the sound was coming from. As soon as we went up there, the sound stopped. We had a good look round and couldn't find anything. Went back downstairs. Then the knocking started again. I went up myself on my own with a powerful torch. And as soon as I got rounded the corner to where the sound was coming from, it stopped. I went back downstairs and the same thing happened again. Now, this time, the second time I went up on my own, the noise continued, and I searched the area with my torch. I could find no speakers or nothing to account for the noise. I couldn't tell where it was actually coming from. And I stayed up there, and then it stopped. I went back downstairs. And then later on, we all decided to go upstairs. We went up the main staircase, which has a sort of vaulted ceiling, stone vaulted ceiling. And as we were walking upstairs, there was a terrific sound of falling masonry, really loud. Everyone ran, because I basically everyone thought that the place was collapsing on top of them. But nothing actually happened. There was no fallen masonry or anything. I think possibly that when they were building the house, they possibly had an accident or something went wrong while they were building the staircase, and it did actually collapse. And it was a sort of like a recording of what actually happened.
Right, okay. Fascinating, right? Absolutely fascinating. And is there any other cases that you can recall that were fascinating like that?
Myself, no. I mean, that was quite an eventful evening. Another time we went up there and stood in this corridor where the noise, the hammering had been coming from, the loud banging, and there was a sound that sounded, which I can only describe as a sort of cross between an express train and a jet aircraft slowly coming up the corridor. And people were standing both sides, leaning against the wall. And, the sound actually came between us. And you shone a torch, you couldn't see anything. And at the same time, leaning against the wall, we all felt the house vibrating.
Gosh,
Rather strange.
absolutely.
But, it's quite an interesting building. I have a great interest in historic buildings. Of course, that's not very old. It's 1850s it was built. But, I shan't forget that night in a hurry.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay then, well look, so to get hold of your book, that's available on Amazon.com.
Yes.
Yep, excellent.
If they just type it, anyone goes and type under books and puts Robert Snow, they will come across it.
Excellent. Okay.
Books called Strange Experiences.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, look, just Robert Snow, just thank you so much for joining us today.
It's all right. It's a pleasure.